In this segment, I want to continue talking about the Congress, the similarities and differences between the two houses of Congress. Of course, since they're both a part of the U.S. Congress, there are a lot of similarities. They're all elected by the people. They meet in Washington. They're in the same building. But there are differences. The House, as I've already mentioned, has the authority to start revenue bills. Not to finish them, but if you want to tax the American people, you've got to start with a bill in the House of Representatives. And that goes not just for a new tax, but for revising any of the existing taxes. When you get to the Senate, with this notion, now pretty outdated, that the Senate was kind of a special advisory council to the President, it had the authority with regard to treaties. It gave the advice and consent, they called it, to the treaties, which we now call just ratification of treaties. The Senate also has the authority to confirm ambassadors that are sent from this country to another country. And next step up, they're entitled to ratify or confirm the choices that the President makes to fill the upper level positions in each of the cabinet departments. Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, Undersecretary of Defense, and so on. All appointed by the President, but confirmed by the Senate. Federal judges, not just those on the Supreme Court where there's lots of publicity when they're up for confirmation, but all federal judges, every one of them, has to be confirmed by the U.S. Senate. So the Senate has extra responsibilities there. And then, of course, there's the major difference over impeachment. The House of Representatives impeaches by a simple majority vote of those present and voting. The Senate holds a trial, and then by a two-thirds vote of those present and voting, they would vote to convict. They've convicted some federal judges in impeachment trials, but never convicted a president. Those are key differences. The last confirmation, the last vote, is confirming a new vice president. We now have the 25th Amendment, which says in the event that there's a vacancy in the office of vice president, which could happen because the vice president died, resigned, or was impeached, or there's a vacancy in the office of president because, for the same reason, he died, resigned, or was impeached, a new vice president can be appointed. Appointed by the president, that's not too surprising. All of the vice presidents have been presidential choices. But this time, they have to be confirmed, and they have to be confirmed by a majority vote in both houses of Congress. So you can only be a vice president if both houses have signed off on you. Now, those are the official large differences between the House and Senate specified in the Constitution. But there are some other differences that are important to consider. One is the simple size. The House of Representatives has 435 members, the Senate only 100. So right there, the Senate gets off with a higher prestige because you're only one of 100 instead of just one of 435. And this has some other consequences. If you look at the structure of the House, because there are so many more people, the rules in the House, particularly governing things like debate, votes on the floor, membership on committees, all of these are much more tightly organized. It has to be a much more tightly organized, much more hierarchical body. What does that mean? Well, it means that while all of the members of the House get to vote on Speaker, and the Speaker is the choice of the caucus of the party that has the most seats, once they vote for the Speaker then has a lot of authority. He has authority over the committees, he has authority over debate, and so on. He has more authority and can enforce more rules to maintain order in a larger body. The Senate, not so much. It's a smaller body, so they can get away with less tightly structured arrangement. They don't elect their Speaker. Their Speaker is the Vice President of the United States. He may be a Vice President of a party that occupies the White House while there's a majority in the other House. So you may have a Speaker who's acting contrary to the majority of the Senate. Well, how do they arrange for things? Well, in the Senate, they reach an agreement between the majority leader and the minority leader. That governs how legislation is considered, how debate is handled, a number of issues, and it is a much more jointly structured body. Since it's that way, the rules are looser, but they have to have greater range of compromise and agreement before they can move forward on anything else. Now, where this becomes most obvious, the biggest difference is how they handle debate and voting on the floor. In the next segment, I'm going to talk about the committee system, and the committee system amplifies debate. The committee system divides the workload of the Congress in packages so that people can discuss it at greater length than they can on the floor of either house. But when it comes to discussing things on the floor of the two houses, the treatment of deliberation, or what we sometimes shorten to a discussion of simply talk. How much talk can you do? The talk is treated differently in both houses. In the House of Representatives, with 435 members, if every one of them spoke for 100 minutes, for 1 minute, that would be 435 minutes. That's several hours. And if you're going to give each of them a 10-minute speech, you've used up a whole week with no trouble at all. So you can't just have everybody talking all at once. And the arrangement in the House is this. The amount of debate on any bill is controlled by the Rules Committee. Now the Rules Committee becomes, it's not even quite fair to call it a standing committee because its jurisdiction is so much broader. Every bill that comes out of a standing committee in the House of Representatives goes to the Rules Committee. There, a determination is made by the Rules Committee as to how long the debate can go forward. If they decide that it's 4 hours, they'll give 2 hours to the majority party and 2 hours to the minority party. And in terms of the bill, the sponsors of the bill and the principal opponents of the bill will be given that total block of time. Well, 2 hours is 120 minutes, and you're not going to have half the people talking for a half minute. So the directors of legislation, for and against, will be in charge of the time, and they will decide which congressperson gets to talk for perhaps 5 or 10 minutes. That's going to be the maximum debate. And the concern over time is so important that if you ever watch C-SPAN, watch a debate, as soon as a member of the House concludes his remarks, he says, "I yield back the balance of my time." If he happens to have any time left over, it will be yielded back and will be used by his side to continue the debate. You never hear them fail to say that because it's so critical. If they were to stop early, well, they've just lost the time, and not say that, they would have lost the time. So the House of Representatives is tightly structured. The Rules Committee will decide how much debate takes place. The Rules Committee will also decide how many amendments can be considered. And they may decide to have a closed rule, which means no amendments at all. Now, I want you to think about that situation for just a minute. What does it mean to have a closed rule? Well, it means when you come to the floor, there are no amendments. You're going to take it or leave it. That means you can have a good bill that you'd really like to vote for, but it has a highly unacceptable feature. And this causes real dilemmas for congressmen who might be running for re-election. They might want to favor a particular bill, but then have some feature in it that's very harmful to a majority of people in their district. The people in their district may forget the good part of the bill, only to hold the congressman accountable for the fact that he voted for something that's hated in his district. So a closed rule really does create dilemmas often for congresspersons. But that's in the hands of the Rules Committee. And the Rules Committee there is controlled now. Not always, it hasn't always been this way, but it's now controlled by the Speaker. The Speaker makes the appointments. You want to be on the Rules Committee, you're going to be very nice to the Speaker, or you're not going on. And if you're in the minority party, you're going to be very nice to your minority leader, or you're not going on the Rules Committee. The Rules Committee will be divided so that there's a majority. The majority party will have a majority of seats on the Rules Committee. So in effect, the Rules Committee becomes important mainly for the majority party, because the minority party is not going to have an effective voice. But that would be true of other committees as well. Now, this is all a part of the tight structure that governs the House of Representatives. What about the Senate? Well, the Senate, my goodness, the Senate has fewer members, and they have the same amount of time, so they can be more generous. And in fact, they are almost to the opposite extreme, extremely generous. The U.S. Senate has often called itself the world's greatest deliberative body. That means from the outset, way back in 1789 when things started out, the Senate had no way to cut off debate at all. They had a rule that said every senator had to say things that were germane or relevant to the issue at hand. But then they had another rule that said every senator was in charge of deciding what he said was germane or relevant. Well, that's like saying the senators can say just anything they want to for as long as they want to. And the original situation had a Senate where filibusters were absolute. If you could maintain a filibuster, you could kill legislation. And you'd kill not only the piece of legislation that's being filibustered, but any legislation due to be considered after that bill was finished. The pressure that ended filibusters was always from the side that was filibustering. If they looked at the situation and said, well, this bill is terrible, we hate it, we're filibustered to death, but we've got other bills we want to consider, and so we'll abandon it. And if that doesn't take place, that bill that was being filibustered went nowhere. All of that stopped during World War I, or in the run-up to World War I, when it was just decided that national security was so immense that a rule had to be put through. And at that point, a filibuster was defeated and a rule was adopted in the Senate that debate could be cut off. The rule for cutting off debate was called cloture or closure, the cutting off of debate. It initially required 2/3 of those present and voting. There were at that point there were 48 states, there were 96 senators. 2/3 of those present and voting, which could be, say, as low as 60 or 55, they could cut off debate if nobody else showed up. Of course, a vote on cloture meant that everybody was on notice, so you pretty much got a full house. But still, the rule was 2/3 of those present and voting. Later, the rule on cloture was a mere 60 votes of the entire membership. By that point, there were 50 states and 100 senators, so 60 out of 100 is the necessary amount for cutting off debate. Now, the custom in the Senate worked like this. Nobody wanted to cut off debate. If you were a senator and you voted to cut off debate, you might be solving a problem in one bill, but as other bills came up that you objected to, you might want to have the right to filibuster and kill that bill. So senators were reluctant to cut off debate. And very few filibusters ended with a cloture vote. Again, the pressure for additional legislation needing to pass was the thing that kept filibusters fairly short. That has changed because of the polarization of American politics, because of the polarization that exists in both parties, not in the parties that vote in the states, not among the American people. They still have a big bell-shaped curve to describe their opinion, but the polarization in the parties is so great that the issue of cloture has become dominant. Now, it's commonplace for the minority party to try to stop legislation through a filibuster, and that means any significant piece of legislation has to muster a cloture vote. But having 60 votes for either party is almost unheard of. In my lifetime, there have only been two periods, a 2-year period under Lyndon Johnson and about a 6-month period under Barack Obama, when either party had as many as 60 votes. So you have deadlock, you have a cutoff of debate, and that's the real lesson of the discussion in the both houses of Congress. More discussion is possible in committees, and I'll take that up in the next segment.